Hello, my name is Scott Nelson. I was educated at the Eastern Michigan University in freshwater biology and computer science. I've been employed at the U.S. Geological Survey's Great Lakes Science Center for 38 years. As the information technology lead, I am past president of the Rotary Club of Ann Arbor North, where I've been a member for 30 years. And I manage my club's butterfly garden located in a local city park. I have belonged to a local church where I installed a solar panel project and also a rain garden. And our church is actually a community of practice for plant-rich diets. I also belong to the steering committee of the Washtenaw County Optimal Wellness, another community of practice promoting the Blue Zones lifestyle in our county. And I am the co-chair of the Plant-Rich Diet Task Force of Rotary International Environmental Sustainability Rotary Action Group. So I'm happy to provide to you this presentation today about plant-rich diets, which are a powerful and yet largely untapped solution to, number one, addressing climate change, and number two, protecting the environment, but also number three, promoting human health. And the beauty of the plant-rich diet solution is that we can start today. This is a planetary solution that is entirely in our hands as consumers. It doesn't require political will, new technology, trillions of dollars of investment, intense negotiations, or decades of implementation. All it takes is a conscious decision by those of us who don't face food insecurity, so especially those of us living in wealthier nations, to eat more plants and fewer animals starting today. That's it. And more great news is that plant-rich diets will improve our health and save money. Research has demonstrated that plant-rich dietary patterns can prevent and sometimes even reverse chronic diseases and are generally less expensive than meat-heavy diets. Now, as you listen to our presentation today and you learn about how the world's high consumption of meat, dairy, eggs, and fish is harming our planet, please keep in mind that all we have to do to halt and reverse the harm is to eat fewer of these foods. And next, let's see if I can advance my slide here. There we go. Okay. And actually on this slide right here is a whole menu of topics and contacts for you to zoom into your club for other presentations presented by SRAG. So fasten your seatbelts because this is an action-packed agenda. We'll discuss how plant-rich diets can address climate change, protect the environment. We'll share some sustainable eating strategies, talk about the positive impacts on human health, invite you for our 15-day plant-rich diet challenge, and leave you with some calls to action. And this is a sign-up sheet for our 15-day plant-rich diet challenge that was put on up in Washington State, but it's actually a self-study course that anybody can take at any time, and we are happy to provide you with a link to that information. I'd like to define what it means to what is meant by a plant-rich diet. It's any dietary pattern that consists mostly of plant foods, including vegetables, fruits, legumes, whole grains, nuts, and seeds, but optionally also can include a small amount of meat, dairy, eggs, and fish. The plate depicted here was published by Eat Lancet Commission in 2019. This commission brought together 37 scientists from 16 countries to determine the dietary pattern that would be optimal for both human health and environmental sustainability. And this plate reflects the dietary pattern that accomplishes both of these goals simultaneously. And while some people might think that when you adopt a plant-rich diet, you'll eat nothing but boring salads for the rest of your life. Nothing could be further from the truth. Look at all of these delicious and colorful dishes. Plant-rich eating offers an endless variety of flavors, ingredients, herbs, and spices from around the world, and accommodates every cultural taste and preference. And how cool is it to know that you can protect the planet simply by eating delicious food? So let's talk about climate change. We'll be exploring the relationship between animal agriculture and climate change. On August 9th, 2021, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC, told us that unless there were immediate, rapid, and large-scale reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, achieving our climate goals will be beyond reach. While a temperature rise of 1.5 degrees Celsius is sometime within the next 2 decades is essentially locked in, we do have a short window to avoid locking in a climate catastrophe. And we really need to take advantage of this window, because what we're hearing is that planetary warming above 1.5 degrees Celsius will mean more and larger floods, heat waves, worsening droughts, greater sea level rise, etc. And what we don't often talk about, but which is that changes in rainfall and hotter temperatures will make it more difficult to grow food, putting a third of global food production at risk. The IPCC made it clear that now is the time to pull out all of the stops and reduce all greenhouse gas emissions every single place we can, including the global food system. Here's why. 2 recently published studies, one which was spearheaded by the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, found that the global food system is responsible for about 34% or 18 gigatons of global human-caused greenhouse gas emissions. This is more than double the total emissions for the United States. 57% of these emissions come from the production of animal-based foods, including livestock feed. 29% comes from production of plant-based foods, and 14% comes from other utilizations. The food that is responsible for the most emissions is beef, accounting for 25% of total food system emissions. This is an incredible opportunity because plant-rich diets offer a simple and fast way to reduce emissions from animal agriculture. Reducing or eliminating beef alone will have a huge impact. To give you a sense for the magnitude of animal agriculture's emissions, here are a few data points. The top 5 meat and dairy companies combined emit more greenhouse gases than ExxonMobil, Shell, or BP. In fact, if just cows were their own nation, they would be the world's 3rd largest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions, behind China and the US. This chart helps us to understand why. It shows greenhouse gas emissions for every 100 grams of protein produced of each of these foods. Producing beef emits about 20 times more greenhouse gas emissions than producing comparable plant-based proteins like beans, other pulses, and peas, which you see at the bottom of the chart. Producing other products from cows, including dairy herd beef, cheese, and milk, also results in far more greenhouse gas emissions than plant-based protein foods. Pork and chicken are not off the hook, since producing them emits about 3 times more greenhouse gas emissions than producing legumes. Next, to put this data into context, the Natural Resources Defense Council tells us that if every American were to cut out just 1/4 pound of beef per week, the greenhouse gas reduction would be like taking 10 million cars off the road for 1 year. On a global scale, if the 2 billion of us high consumers of meat and dairy cut our consumption by just 40%, we would avoid 168 gigatons of future greenhouse gas emissions, which is equivalent to almost three times the total global emissions in 2019. And where are all these emissions coming from? The livestock industry is a leading emitter of all three of the top greenhouse gases: methane, nitrous oxide, and carbon dioxide. Methane comes directly from livestock animals. It's emitted in the burps of ruminants, especially cows, but also sheep, goats, and buffalo, and from manure lagoons on industrialized dairies, pig farms, and cattle feedlots. Nitrous oxide comes primarily from growing feed crops. It's emitted from the breakdown of synthetic nitrogen fertilizer used on feed crops and from the decomposition of manure spread on feed crops or left on pastures. Carbon dioxide is released when natural ecosystems like forests and grasslands are converted to pasture for grazing livestock or to crops like soybean or corn for livestock feed. And I'm going to try to move my picture out of the way there. There we go. The carbon that was in the trees, vegetation, and soils gets released into the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide also comes from the use of fossil fuels to make fertilizers and pesticides for feed crops and from transporting and processing livestock feed. So let's take a look at each of these gases to really appreciate why global shift to plant-rich diets can be a game changer for our climate. Starting with methane, the IPCC just told us that the fast and drastic cuts to methane are imperative to avoid a climate catastrophe. The reason that methane reductions are so important is that methane only lasts about a decade in our atmosphere compared to CO2, which can last hundreds to thousands of years. But if you look at its impact over its short lifespan, methane traps about 85 times more heat than CO2. This is called methane's GWP20, or global warming potential over 20 years. Methane is largely responsible for the fast pace of planetary warming. About 30% of global warming today is due to methane emissions. Methane offers a huge opportunity because if we reduce it now, the atmosphere will respond quickly within a decade or so, and planetary warming will slow down. A lead reviewer for the IPCC report stated that cutting methane is the single biggest and fastest strategy for slowing down warming. As this chart shows, 32% of the world's methane comes from livestock. It's the world's second leading source of methane after the fossil fuel industry, which emits 35%. They are about equal. Methane comes directly from livestock animals. Downsizing the livestock industry will reduce methane emissions. It's that simple. Cutting methane from both the fossil fuel industry and animal and agriculture is imperative. But what about nitrous oxide? Nitrous oxide is considered a climate super pollutant. It traps 298 times more heat in our atmosphere than does CO2. It also now is the world's leading ozone depleting emission. It's emitted in smaller quantities than CO2, but packs a giant punch. Well, again, there's good news. 53% of nitrous oxide emissions come from animal agriculture. And remember that nitrous oxide results from nitrogen fertilizer and manure used on feed crops. If the demand for animal products, we don't need to grow as much livestock feed, and nitrous oxide emissions will drop. This is great news for the climate and our water resources, since we'll have less nitrogen fertilizer and manure and fewer pesticides and herbicides washing off feed crops into our waterways. And finally, let's take a look at carbon dioxide. Plant-rich diets offer a huge opportunity to cut carbon emissions and facilitate carbon sequestration. Raising animals for food requires an enormous amount of land. In fact, animal agriculture is the largest user of land on the planet, using 83% of the world's farmland to graze livestock and grow livestock feed. 34% of global crop production goes to feeding livestock. Here's a great infographic from the Plant Nutrition Project. Feeding one person the standard American diet, which is heavy in meat and dairy, requires about 2 football fields worth of land. However, the same 2 football fields can feed 14 people on a mostly plant-based diet if all 8 billion of us on Earth were consuming the standard American diet. We would need at least 2 planet Earths to feed us all. This enormous need for land means that the global livestock industry is the #1 driver of tropical deforestation. And when forests or other natural habitats are burned, cleared, and or tilled, or to create pasture or grow livestock feed, the trees, vegetation, and soils release their vast stores of carbon into the atmosphere, increasing CO2 levels. The newly cleared land to sequester carbon is severely compromised, which means that more and more CO2 remains in our atmosphere as we clear more land. According to a study published in 2020, if the world continues consuming meat as usual, we'll pump another 86 gigatons of CO2 into our atmosphere by 2050 from land use change alone. However, if the world were to cut meat consumption by 70%, the pasture and feed crop land that we could liberate back to nature for restoration of native forests and grasslands could sequester 332 gigatons of CO2 by the year 2050. That's close to the remaining carbon budget of 360 gigatons. That gives us a 66% chance of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. This sequestration potential would provide us with the desperately needed time and wiggle room to roll out green energy without exceeding 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming. Importantly, the researchers found that even if we liberated all of livestock's land back to nature today, we could still produce more than enough food for every human living on Earth using the remaining cropland. Reducing fossil fuel use is fundamental to limit global warming, but the CO2, nitrous oxide, and methane removal by terrestrial vegetation following plant-rich dietary shifts would contribute more to international greenhouse gas reduction targets. And just imagine the habitat and ecosystems we could restore. Plant-rich diets offer us an almost dreamlike opportunity to take our degraded planet into our arms and bring it back to life. Plant-rich diets can be a game changer for our climate. Project Drawdown, an SRAG partner and a research organization that has evaluated the 76 available solutions for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, ranks plant-rich diets as the 4th most powerful solution out of all 76. Plant-rich diets, together with reducing food waste, are the two most powerful demand-side solutions for taking a big bite out of climate change. So let's spend a little bit of time sharing how plant-rich diets offer a plethora of co-benefits to our environment, starting with water. Currently, fertilizer, pesticide, and manure runoff from feed crops, together with pollutants from industrialized animal feeding operations and slaughterhouses, are a leading cause of water pollution around the world, causing toxic algal blooms, fish kills, dead zones, and contaminated drinking water. Reducing animal agriculture reduces water pollution. Plant-rich diets would also go a long way to conserving precious water. 75% of freshwater globally is used for crops and livestock. Beef alone accounts for 1/3 of the global water footprint of farm animal production. In the US, cattle feed is the largest user of water, consuming 23% of all water nationally, 32% in the drought-stricken Western United States, and 55% in the equally drought-stricken Colorado River Basin. Most of the water used by the livestock industry is for irrigating livestock feed. Reducing consumption of livestock products, the water currently used to grow animal feed could be conserved or better used. Animal agriculture is the #1 cause of tropical deforestation and destruction of other habitats around the world, and especially in South America. This is taking a very heavy toll on wildlife. If we switch to plant-rich diets, we will curtail deforestation and give these guys a good chance to recover. This is the first and most fundamental step to realizing all of these wonderful planet-restoring opportunities. This change will be aided by providing support to farmers to switch from animal agriculture to growing diversified plants like oats, hemp, fava beans, vegetables, etc., and setting aside land for carbon sequestration, biodiversity protection, water restoration, etc. This is an area that needs attention and major support right now. At the bottom of the slide are several pioneering organizations, including 3 nonprofits and 2 plant-based food companies, which are already helping farmers to make the switch. They include Agriculture Fairness Alliance, the Rancher Advocacy Program, the Transfarmation Project, Mayoko's Creamery, and Hulsa Dairy-Free Oat Gurt. And here's a sample of brave farmers who are making the switch and blazing a new path for other farmers. Some are doing it on their own, and others are working with the organizations listed on the previous slide. These farmers are switching from producing chickens and cattle to growing hemp, mushrooms, organic vegetables, from producing dairy to growing oats for oat milk, and from producing goat milk to making vegan cheese. These farmers are excited about the prospects of a new life that is not only more financially rewarding, but also better for health and emotional well-being. Beyond protecting the environment, there is also an additional profound benefit. One of the greatest things about plant-rich diets as a solution to the climate and environmental emergencies is that they are simultaneously one of the most effective ways to improve human health and address the global chronic disease epidemic. Research in nutritional science has demonstrated that diets rich in whole plant foods reduce our risk for chronic diseases like heart disease, type 2 diabetes, obesity, and even cancer. Plant-rich diets can also improve our health by lowering blood sugar, cholesterol, blood pressure, and reducing inflammation. A recent study published in June of 2021 found that plant-rich diets also help to protect against the effects of COVID-19. reducing severity, hospitalization, and death. A report published in 2020 by the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, the World Health Organization, and other international non-governmental organizations analyzed the potential impact on health if the world were to adopt any of the four plant-rich dietary patterns, including flexitarian, pescatarian, vegetarian, or vegan. They concluded that compared to what would happen if global diets remained unchanged, a global shift to plant-rich diets would significantly reduce mortality, preventing 12.7 to 13.7 million premature adult deaths in 2030. They also projected that a shift to plant-rich diets would reduce diet-related health expenditures, meaning direct and indirect costs from coronary heart disease, stroke, cancer, and type 2 diabetes by an average of 95% worldwide in the year 2030. The authors suggested that the savings in healthcare costs could be invested in lowering the cost of nutritious food. So I hope I've conveyed just how powerful and transformational plant-rich diets can be for our climate, environment, and our health. And as you can see from this slide, dietary changes are a personal choice. Our goal is to empower people with knowledge and applying the four-way test to plant-rich diets. And this is a diagram that I created showing how plant-rich diets are the center of lifestyle as a medicine, as well as climate-safe lifestyle. I've written a Rotary position paper showing the data that backs this up. And so now we'd like to invite you to attend an upcoming global 15-day plant-rich diet challenge. And the current version starts on January 11th down in the Virgin Islands. And you can do this as a self-study course. All the content is up online. You will receive a starter kit, a cookbook, daily emails, 15 of them, and also 15 expert speakers, video presentations, and you'll want to hear each and every one of them. You'll hear from scientists, climate and sustainability experts, medical practitioners, an Everest mountaineer, entrepreneurs, a pioneer in rural community empowerment, and plant-rich cooking enthusiasts. So here's a call to action. Experiment with a plant-rich diet yourself. Increase the amount of plants in your diet. Sign up for the Plant-Rich Diet Challenge. Promote the challenge in your club or in your district, and suggest plant-rich meals at your club and Rotary meetings. So on behalf of the Plant-Rich Diet Task Force and myself, I want to thank you for your time today, and thank you as well for all the amazing work that each of you are doing to protect and restore our planet. And thank you.